John Kunz. John Kunz was born in a Nazi slave labor concentration camp during World War II before growing up in Great Falls. At the end of the war, Kunz, his parents, and his siblings immigrated to the United States and made their home in Great Falls. We are so excited to host Mr. Kunz and hear his powerful story, A Journey to Freedom, tonight at Great Falls College. My name is Amy Pearson. I am a communication faculty member here at Great Falls College. After John's talk tonight, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So please be thinking of questions you might want to ask Mr. Kunz. This evening, if you'll look around in the back, also features an exhibit called The Courage to Remember, which was produced by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and it includes 40 original posters depicting the horrors of the Holocaust and the courage and resilience of its victims. I, for one, am in great admiration of Mr. Kunz and so proud to be here tonight to introduce him. Let's welcome him to the stage.
Got to get the cheaters on, you know. Good evening, dzień dobry in Polish, and that means good day. To me, every day is a good day. The journey to freedom. Number one, before we get started, I just want to thank Dr. Stephanie Erdman and Dr. Amy Pearson for inviting me here, and Dr. Susan Wolf for encouraging me to be here. And this is a personal history, a reminder of the Nazi Holocaust, our family survival, but most of all, gratitude. Also, the poster display, The Courage to Remember, was produced by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, as Amy said, and it was brought to Montana by an attorney in Missoula by the name of Bruce Barrett. And, you know, here's an example of serendipity or maybe divine intervention. These posters were found abandoned in crates in the basement of the Times Square building downtown. And how I came to know about them, that's part of the serendipity. I had called Tree Amigos to come over and give me a bid on trimming my trees. And I got visiting with Dennis Stringer, who's one of the owners of the Tree Amigos. And I expressed to him my interest in history and also my involvement in some history. And he looked at me and he says, geez, he says, we found these posters. He says, can you come down and look at them and see what you think? Wow. I went down and looked at those. They broke open the wooden crates and and started pulling these posters out. And it was just overwhelming. It was just amazing. This is an amazing story, amazing history of the Holocaust and its effects and all of the victims and some survivors. And these posters, again, by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and they were used for education, but the last time that I found any record of them being used was, I think, about 2008. And so they've been in crates ever since. And I did get a hold of Bruce Barrett, and I got permission to use them. So they're displayed here. So if you haven't taken the time to look at those before, stay a little later after and check those out, because it's just an amazing amazing history that we have on display. And hopefully we'll be able to use those for other educational purposes as we go along. Oh, and another thank you, before I forget, to Corey Thompson and Amanda Zazaveda at Staples for a lot of help, because I'm a little shy on technical knowledge, and they sure helped me out. So, and bear with me throughout this as I stumble. So again, Jim Brovde, good day. This is just this meet has special meaning for me every single day. What was the Holocaust? The Holocaust was Nazi Germany's vision, led by their leader, Adolf Hitler, to dominate Europe and the world by eliminating certain people, namely Jews, Poles, other Slavs, Gypsies, and any other undesirables. And to populate, Hitler wanted to populate Europe with German colonists after the war. That was his plan. There was a misconception that the Holocaust was just about the Jews. Oh, I have let me see. Oh, I need help. There we go. There we go. This proclamation, I found this proclamation in my research, and this proclamation was issued by Adolf Hitler in August of 1939. Hitler invaded Poland in September 1 of 1939. But this proclamation was done prior to that invasion. And you can see it there on the screen, but I'll read it to you. I have issued the command, and I'll have anybody who utters but one word of criticism executed by firing squad. That our war aim does not consist in reaching certain lines, but in the physical destruction of the enemy. Accordingly, I have placed my death head formations in readiness for the present only in the east, with orders to them to send to death mercilessly and without compassion men, women, and children of Polish derivation and language. Only thus shall we gain the living space that we need, Lebensraum. And that was issued prior to his invasion of Poland. You know, it just, and again, people weren't aware of this. There's my German birth certificate. I was born August 21, 1944. And the birth certificate was actually issued. When I was born in a concentration camp, they didn't care about issuing me a birth certificate. So this birth certificate was actually issued 2 years after the liberation by the U.S. Army. And so it lists my place of birth as Ramsenthal Lager. That means Ramsenthal camp. During this time of World War II, the Nazis killed between 6 and 12 million people from many countries. The toll in Poland was 6 million, 15% of the population. And the ratio of Jews to Gentiles in Poland was 1-to-1. And that's something that is not, most people aren't aware of that, but with all of the research that I've done, that was the ratio, 1-to-1 in Poland. And then, so the Nazis established extermination camps and slave labor camps and crematoriums in Poland and in Germany, to kill those undesirables and to dispose of the remains. Some of those camps were Auschwitz, Dachau, Belst, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald. That's just to name a few. But during this time, I'm going to come back to this. During this time, there were every one of those little red dots, that was another concentration camp. There were 800 between Poland and Germany. And where I was, right here, just north of Nuremberg, that's where I was. Initially, these were labor camps because they needed labor to build the camps. They didn't use Germans to build the concentration camps. They used slave labor, and this slave labor was from all the different countries, and they didn't care if they were Jewish or whatever. But initially those camps were all occupied as slave labor to build the camps initially, and then they progressed to the extermination. So during this time, the Nazis enslaved about 12 million people from 20 countries. 2/3 were from Eastern Poland, from Eastern Europe. 21% were from Poland. During World War II, the Nazis operated several categories of labor camps for different categories of inmates. Prisoners in Nazi labor camps were worked to death on short rations and bad conditions, or killed if they became unable to work. Many died as a direct result of the forced labor under the Nazis. There were a total of about 800 camps, as I said. Initially, the main camps, for example, Auschwitz in 1940 to 1942, the Poles predominated the inmates at Auschwitz. Over time, the proportions changed. In August of 1944, the main camp held more than 9,000 Jews, 4,000 Poles, and 3,000 prisoners of other nationalities. And that was just in Auschwitz, one camp. So, that's the kind of the description of what transpired in World War II, a little clarification of what the Nazis were doing. Now we get to the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. I've been very fortunate in my life, starting with being born in a concentration camp. Now, that's a crazy thing to say, isn't it? But if I hadn't been born in that concentration camp, I wouldn't be here with you. Where would I be? So I'm fortunate to be born there. I survived against all odds by the grace of God. Fortunate, because if I hadn't been born there in that misery, I wouldn't be here. My parents were both born in southeastern Poland, near the city of Lwów. Oh, this was the different types of camps that existed during the war. So again, my parents were both born near Lwów in southeastern Poland. My father came from a tiny village of Józefówka, where his father was a forester for a large estate. My mother was from Sambor in a small village near there. That whole area where they were from was Poland at that time. It's now Ukraine. So I've got relatives on both sides of the border at this point. Yeah. And you see what's happening in Ukraine right now. It's pretty crazy. But anyway, so that's where my parents originally were from. They moved after their marriage and they started having children. They moved a little further west, so into what is now Poland proper. But it was just a little further west from where they originally came from. They had a little farm, little subsistence farm. My dad talked about this area, and he says the area where he and my mother were both from was populated by Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, some ethnic Germans. And why ethnic Germans in that area? Well, you know, it goes back into history. Catherine the Great, back in the 1750s, was not Russian. Catherine the Great was German. And Catherine the Great set up like a similar plan to what we had here in the United States, the Homestead Act. So Catherine the Great established that Homestead Act because she wanted to populate South Russia with German colonists. And so she offered them land grants. They were exempt from military duty. They also had some tax advantages, and they were allowed to keep their own churches, their own schools, and their own language. And that was, so that whole area where my parents were from was a very homogeneous population of, again, Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, and Germans, you know, all of that in that area. World War I, that area was overrun by the Russian Bolsheviks. And then, of course, you know, that whole war began. My grandparents and my father, as a young child, World War I, they hid out in the forest until the war was over. My grandmother, on my dad's mother, she was injured with shrapnel and lost the use of an eye, and but survived. They all survived. There was peace from 1919 to 1939. Then World War II, the Germans invaded Poland from the west, September 1, 1939, and the Russians invaded Poland from the east, September 17th, 1949. And what's really crazy is prior to the invasion, Hitler and Stalin had signed a non-aggression pact. They both lied. They both lied. At the beginning of World War II, my parents had a little small subsistence farm near Tomaszow Lubelski. It's a small village. My father's main occupation was carpentry, building homes, horse-drawn wagons, and sleighs. And this is also where some of the biggest battles between the Russian and the German armies occurred, and also where later the Nazis had an extermination camp known as Belzec. talk about, and my parents talked about knowing the existence and the purpose of this Belsitz and the overpowering smell of burning bodies. And at this time, now here's another crazy thing that has occurred. At this time, my cousin, Tomasz Hanenko, is a director of a Holocaust museum at the killing site of Belz. And I'm in contact with him regularly. Colleen and I were able to have lunch and dinner with him and his father in Krakow 5 years ago. And so I see postings on Facebook about the different educational events that he conducts at this Holocaust museum in Belz, Poland. In 1941, my father was conscripted by the occupying Nazis to forced labor and left the family behind at their little farm. Several weeks later, he escaped and made his way back to the family. However, the Nazis caught up to him. He was imprisoned and beaten with rubber hoses. They beat him with rubber hoses because they didn't want to break any bones because they still needed labor, right? My mother went to see him when he was imprisoned, and she said that she could not even recognize him. He was beaten so badly. She bartered his release with milk, butter, and eggs from the farm, and for a short time, the family was united. In 1942, my family was taken from their farm by the German Nazis. And then as they were being driven away from their farm, they watched as the Nazis killed their livestock and burned the farm. As the Nazis were retreating from the Russians, they didn't want to leave any spoils behind that the Russians could utilize. My parents, my older siblings, with thousands of Poles, were shipped out of Poland to southern Germany by train in cattle cars to slave labor camps. My family was sent to a camp named Ramsenthal Lager near Bayreuth, north of Nuremberg. This was a small camp. It consisted of wooden barracks behind barbed wire fence. My father and my older brothers were sent out on work details as needed, sometimes as farm labor, sometimes construction, and even mining. My brothers at that time were 12 and 13. The Nazis considered male children over the age of 12 as adult as far as labor. So they were worked as adult men at that time. And the common food at that time was dry bread and usually a thin broth of either broccoli or turnips. For the rest of his life, my father hated broccoli and turnips. I was born in the barracks in that camp. There were no doctors. My older sister, Amelia, age 10, assisted at my birth, as she has reminded me all of my life. I was not expected to survive. She cared for me. My sister cared for me while my mother went back to work because my mother was sewing for the Nazis. That was her job. My mother, because of lack of proper nutrition, was not able to nurse me. So again, they did not expect me to survive, but they found another lady in the barracks that was able to nurse me and was willing to nurse me, and that's how I survived. The war ended in the fall of 1945. Auschwitz was liberated in January of 1945, but our camp was not liberated until the fall of 1945 by the U.S. Army. The camp was deserted by the Nazis as the U.S. Army advanced. So here's a photo of just a stock photo of the concentration camp barracks, and that was very similar to what we had. The wooden bunks, that's where I was born, was in one of those wooden bunks. And this is a picture of, this is after the liberation by the U.S. Army. That's a picture of my mother standing in the back and holding me up on the chair. And my two sisters, one on each side, my sister Helen and sister Stella. And at this point, I'm not quite 2 years old, standing on that chair. And this was, again, after liberation by the U.S. Army, but we still had to live there because they had no place to put us at that point. And all the clothing that you see, we were, at that point, we were being fed by the U.S. Army and also clothed by the U.S. Army. So we were free, but we were set adrift with no means of survival, along with several million other former prisoners of the Germans. From 1939 to 1945, the Nazis had abducted approximately 12 to 20 million people from all over Europe for slave labor and extermination. 21% were Polish. 6 million Poles were killed or died of starvation during this war. 1945, U.S. Army and the United Nations Relief Administration, along with the Red Cross, established refugee camps in order to assist and sort out millions of people from all over Europe left stranded in Germany. We ended up in a refugee camp in Hamburg, Germany, operated by the U.S. Army. We lived in that camp until July of 1949. This camp, I do remember, we all lived in one small room, but we had food and we had adequate clothing. Part of that camp was set aside for the gypsies. It was my favorite place to go because they somehow still had horses and their wagons, and they always had music and a campfire. There's my two older brothers and my sister Amelia. And Amelia is the one that assisted at my birth. And my two older brothers, and again, the clothing was already furnished by the U.S. Army at that point, or United Nations. This was another family. This was cousins, the Heinze family. These were cousins still in that same camp. And all these photos that I have, they're compliments of the U.S. Army. We didn't have cameras. We didn't have anything. But the U.S. Army, when they liberated those camps, they were documenting everything. And so they had the photos. And luckily, we were able to get these few photos, but I have them. They're a treasure. So I'm going to get back to this one. So another photo of again, this is probably 1946. So still in that same camp, but we had to stay there until we could get, to a refugee camp in Hamburg. So this is in Hamburg, Germany, May Day, 1948. And if you take a look, the down at the bottom, there's a kid with a striped sweater. That's me. And if you take a look at the expression on the little girl's face, I wasn't scoring any points. Whatever I said, she was not happy about. And there's me with my father in 1948, getting ready for our visas to come to the United States and to try to get a sponsor. There's my two sisters, again in 1948. And this is traditional Polish costume that my mother sewed while we were in the refugee camp, because she wanted them to remember that they were still Polish. There was Christmas in 1948 in Hamburg in the refugee camp. And this was the room that we lived in. This room was about 8 feet wide, and it was long, narrow, and it was cots all along one wall. And we all lived in that one room. But again, we had clothing and we had adequate food. And for me, a real specialty was Spam. And to this day, I love Spam. Brings back old memories. At the end of the war, once we were documented, vetted, we were given the choice of either being shipped back to Poland or apply for a sponsorship to a choice of several countries. My mother wanted to go back to Poland. My father said no. He insisted that we go to the United States. Under the Yalta Agreement after the war, now here's something crazy. Poland had just survived invasion and control by the Nazis. After the war, the Yalta Agreement between Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, they handed over Eastern Europe to the communists. So all of a sudden now Poland had just come out of the control by the Nazis, and now it's controlled by the communists. My father said, no, we're not going back to Poland. Even though my mother really wanted to go, family, she wanted to go. And luckily my dad won that battle. And so, yeah, my dad said, and we had talked about this many times over the years. And my dad says, I had had enough of the Bolsheviks, the Nazis, and now the communists. So luckily, my dad won the battle, but it was a long wait. So the way that worked to leave the refugee camp in Germany, you had to get a sponsor. The sponsor had to be willing to pay your passage to a free country. And the countries of choice were US, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, to name most of them. And again, the sponsor's responsibility was to pay for the passage for the individual or family, and then also be responsible for them. So when they got to the country, they were responsible to find them a home and work and a job. So again, we waited. The longest list, of course, for the sponsors was for the United States, of course. And so we waited until almost the end of 1949 and finally got a sponsor, and we were able to come to the United States. We didn't know where we were going, had no idea, went through process at Ellis Island, and that was a scary thing. And I do remember, bits and pieces of that, even though I was, not quite 6. But going through that huge, cavernous, amazing building with thousands and thousands of people going through there, getting jabbed with needles and inoculated and, whatever, and interrogated and processed. And then, of course, we didn't have any knowledge of the United States, the geography, anything. They put us on a train after processing through Ellis Island, put us on a train and headed west. And 5 days later, we land in Butte, Montana. 1949. That was really bleary. I mean, really dreary. You know, yeah. My mother got off the train in Butte, and she was immediately in tears. She says, "Oh my God," she says, "they've taken us to another concentration camp." Yeah. So, but luckily, our sponsor happened to be the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Diocese of Helena, along with the parish in Fairfield, Montana, sponsored about 30 Polish families between 1948 and 1950, and they all found jobs. There was none of them was on the dole, believe me. But here's an interesting little thing that I found in an old newspaper clipping, the Tribune from 1948. Let's see if I can bring that up. Oh, this is my uncle in the Polish cavalry, and we're pretty sure that he died in Dachau, but he disappeared. So we had no knowledge whatsoever. But this was in World War II broke out. Poland still had a horse-mounted cavalry at that time. Oh, there's the Festspielhaus in Bayreuth. That's the concert hall in Bayreuth. And here we go. The church council rebukes Governor Ford of Montana. And this was kind of an interesting thing that I found. The church council rebuked Governor Ford because this is what they printed. We read with considerable resentment the statement of our governor that Montana wants none of these persons, and that he hopes that not one such will be admitted to the United States. Governor Ford seems convinced that America faces a serious economic depression and gives as his reason for refusing to consider the admission of displaced persons the statement that our own people must come first. The church has said, we believe that the exercise of this philosophy of me first will do more to produce the feared depression in America and in the world than anything else that we could possibly do. That was the church council. So the next day, the Governor Ford responded, and Governor Ford says, today, said in Montana is anxious and willing to cooperate in every way possible in receiving displaced Europeans. Ford said that he plans to appoint a state committee to handle the details for accepting the displaced persons. But he added, before anyone will be admitted to this country, it will be necessary for the sponsor to offer assurances of housing, employment, and proper care, and that the individuals would not become a public charge. That was 1948. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so again, we and about 30 Polish families were sponsored to the U.S. by St. John the Evangelist Church, Catholic Church in Fairfield, Montana, and the Catholic Relief Services between 1948 and 1951. Father Russell Scheidler, I'll never forget his name, was the priest who adopted all of us and helped us get settled, and got jobs and homes. Most of these families were scattered around central Montana, wherever they could find work. Some worked in the Anaconda smelter in Great Falls. Some worked for the Great Northern Railroad in Great Falls, Cutbank, Shelby. Others worked on farms. None of them ever went on public assistance. And so I'll read you the names of the families, and these are just the names that I remember, because I couldn't find any real documentation, so I'm doing this strictly from memory. So if I'm wrong, it's too bad. Alekshinsky, Druzhinsky, Grabowski, Jędrzejewski, Kryskowiak. Now there's an interesting one. Kryskowiak, remember Larry Kryskowiak? He played basketball for U of M, and then became a coach and played pro ball. Well, his father was one of the immigrants that came here along with us and processed through Fairfield, Montana. Next was Kubis, Kunz, Nerzhinsky, Olejnik, Pikars, Poplavsky, Ryle, Shelchik, Shvetinsky, Voloshin, and Zazula. These are only the names that I remember. There were probably a few more, but that's just the ones that I know. Our family lived in the basement of that church in Fairfield for almost a year. And the reason that we stayed there so long, living in the basement, is because the priest found out that my mother was really a good cook. So therefore, he recruited my mother to stay and to continue to cook for the rotation of refugees as they came through. We all lived in the basement of that church with little blanket partitions and cots. And my mother would cook for the families as they came. And normally they would just come through Fairfield and spend 3 or 4 or 5 days until the priest was able to place that family with a home and a job. But we stayed there almost a year, then finally moved to Great Falls. Shortly after we arrived in Fairfield, I think within about 2 months, I went into a coma in Fairfield. So I was rushed to Columbus Hospital in a coma, and I was in a coma from malnutrition caused by parasites and infections. I was in the hospital for about a week, scared when I awoke from all the anesthesia, because I couldn't speak English and they couldn't speak Polish. So there I am. I'm in this hospital bed and scared to death. I was 6 years old. I survived. Again, we moved to Great Falls after my father, where my father worked as a carpenter, and he also spent 20 years until he retired as a custodian at Central Catholic High School. My youngest sister, Anne Marie, was born in Great Falls in 1950. She was the first U.S. citizen in our family. Upon getting settled, my parents were able to get my brother Thomas to join us. Oh, forgot to tell you, when we were in Germany, in Hamburg, in the refugee camp, my oldest brother Thomas got tired of waiting for a sponsor, and he had turned 18, and he says, "I just want to get on with my life." Well, after the war, there were a lot of labor recruiters from all over Europe. There were labor recruiters looking for cheap labor. And he signed a contract and ended up in England working for a railroad in England when he was 18. So after we got settled in Great Falls, my parents were able to get my brother Thomas from England back to the United States. But here's another little crazy thing that happened. My brother came to the United States, went to work for the Great Northern Railroad over on the west side in the machine shop. He was here about 6 months, got drafted by the U.S. Army, and got sent to Korea. And that was 1951. So it was right during the Korean War. So he came out of one war and right into another one. He survived. We lived on the lower north side of Great Falls near St. Anne's Cathedral, where I attended St. Mary's School. from the age of about 8, I was selling the evening news, the leader, on a corner down on Skid Row. That was my corner, down by where Bert and Ernie's is now. At that time, it was the old Golden Gate Grocery. If some of the older folks might remember that. But this was across from the old Golden Gate Grocery. And at this time, it was a pretty lively area of Skid Row. I think I had 3 bars on my little corner, 3 bars and 2 Greasy Spoon cafes, and Burger Meat Company. And it was pretty lively. I learned a lot of colorful English down there. That was the beginning of my sales career. So then all through high school, I worked at Durkin Oil Company all through high school, grease jobs and pumping gas and fixing cars. I graduated from Central Catholic High in '62. And right after graduation, I enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. After my discharge as a sergeant, I moved to Newark, New Jersey, where my 2 older brothers had since settled. So I was in Newark, New Jersey after that, and I worked part-time for my brother. My brother, in the meantime, had moved to New Jersey, and he had been working construction, saved some money, ended up buying a bar, of all things. So it was a Polish bar. You couldn't tend bar there unless you could speak Polish. That was it. So during those years, I spoke Polish probably 50% of my time, and English the other 50. So I was able to keep my language. To this day, I still speak Polish. So during that time, I worked for my brother part-time tenant bar. I also worked for American Home Products in packaging research. And I also tried to go to school at night at Rutgers. So I was pretty busy. I returned to Great Falls in 1972 and worked in auto sales and management for many years. And then I began a new career in real estate in 1995 at Coldwell Banker Cogswell. And I bought the company in the year 2000, renamed it Coldwell Banker The Falls. And I've since sold it. And I located the office when I bought the company. I moved from the Cogswell building to the exact same footprint where I worked all through high school. I had gone full circle. Both of my parents lived a long life in Great Falls after surviving the nightmare of World War II and the Nazi concentration camp. My 2 older brothers and my older sister, all died young from the effects of the war and what they had lived through. I'm the only one in the family left at this point. And I'm the only one in Montana. In my heart, this will always be my home. The many friends, relationships, and opportunities that I acquired over the years are priceless. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not thankful for my life, my family, St. John's Parish in Fairfield, Father Russell Scheidler, my friends, my opportunities in the U.S. and Great Falls, Montana. I'm fortunate and grateful. And that's kind of the end of my story, except I have one addition. Oh, and I do have a list of books if you're interested in that piece of history. I do have a list of books, and I can leave a copy with Amy. But I don't think I have them on the screen. Let me see. I don't know where I'm at here. But thank you for saving me. The books that I would recommend if anybody's interested is The Forgotten Holocaust by Richard Lucas, The Volunteer by Jack Fairweather, and I'll tell you a little bit about the book The Volunteer. The Volunteer was written by Jack Fairweather recently, within the last 5 years, and it's a story about a Polish army officer that during the war, he went, of course, Poland was defeated within 45 days. This Polish officer went underground. He went to work for the Polish underground and got thinking about it. And at that time, Auschwitz was just getting started. But he decided that he wanted to go and investigate what was happening in Auschwitz because they had been hearing rumors and nobody was sure. There was no information getting out. So he volunteered. He changed his name and volunteered to get arrested and get sent to Auschwitz and survived. And he survived 2 years. And during that 2-year period in Auschwitz, he was able to organize some rebellions. And then he finally did escape from Auschwitz and made it out with the information about all of the extermination that was happening in Auschwitz. And he shared that with diplomats from Britain and also with France. So that's a very interesting book, The Volunteer by Jack Fairweather. The Story of a Secret State, another amazing story, another Polish officer that worked for the underground, and he actually made the trip from Poland over the Alps on foot during the war, bringing the information to Great Britain, and met with Anthony Eden in Great Britain and shared the information about the death camps and the slave labor camps, and also got the information to President Roosevelt, but they ignored him at that time. But that's the Story of a Secret State by Jan Karski. And last of all, Of Blood and Hope, Samuel Pisar was a Jewish Pole, and he survived. Oh, he was amazing. He survived not only Auschwitz, but he also survived Buchenwald, Majdanek, and one other camp. And he was, when the war started, his parents and his siblings were all killed, but he survived, and he made it all the way through to liberation. And during that whole period, of course, there was no school or anything. He was 12, 13 years old at that time. Samuel Pisar ended up graduating from Harvard Law School in international law and was an advisor to President Kennedy. So pretty amazing. Oh, and Jan Karski, The Story of a Secret State, he came to the United States after the war, and he taught at Georgetown University for 40 years. And some of his students were President Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and several other well-known names. But Jan Karski taught at Georgetown University for 40 years, and his course was in history and compassion. That was it. Oh, and the last book, and it's a book this is a new one, by Mark Sullivan here in Montana. And the name of the book is The Last Green Valley. And it's a historical fiction that tells a similar and parallel story of a family of German settlers who had been living in the Ukraine and trying to escape. This family also did make it to Montana and are very successful in construction. You probably know the name, Martell Construction, out of Bozeman, and now Big Fork. But they were German colonists that had been living in the Ukraine at that time. And so anyway, that's The Last Green Valley. It made a very, very interesting book. So, okay, I'm almost out of breath. However, I have one last piece to my story. For several years, Colleen and I had talked about going to Germany and possibly find the location of Ramsenthal Lager, where I was born. We finally decided to go, make our search, and tour Germany, Austria, and Hungary via the Danube on a Viking River ship. We arranged for 2 extra days at Nuremberg to search for the location. Colleen had arranged for a car and driver to take us to the area of the camp near Bayreuth. Amazing what transpired. The driver that picked us up at our hotel could not have been better. He was Turkish, fluent in German and English. We found out in conversation that the reason he was so fluent in English is he had worked for the U.S. Army for 8 years at a U.S. Army base near Nuremberg. And so he was, again, we were very lucky that he was fluent. After introductions, he asked why we wanted to go to Ramsenthal, since there was just this tiny little village and there was nothing there. There was no services whatsoever. There was no store, no gas station, nothing. There was a railroad station and 50 little houses. He says, why do you want to go there? I said, when I told him my purpose, that I wanted to go there, his eyes lit up. And he said that he was also interested in history and would see if he could find some information to help. Amazing. While driving, he called a museum friend in Bayreuth and asked if they had any information about the camp. The friend said that he would search the archives and call him back. He called a few minutes later and said yes. By phone, he forwarded an aerial photo of the camp taken in 1944, the year that I was born. He also forwarded a news article about the purpose of the camp and the inmates. The village is a very pretty setting, about 50 little white stucco houses with red tile roofs. A train station surrounded by farms with groves of hardwood forest. We now had the photo, but we didn't know the exact location. As we were driving around the village, we saw a lady mowing the lawn. The driver stopped and asked her if she might know the location of this camp. She said she didn't, but her mother had talked about the camp and that we should drive along this little lane and go through this underpass, turn right, and there you could see a grove of trees. The aerial photo that I have shows that grove of trees. Let me see if I can get to that. So I'll get that photo here, I hope. I'm not sure where it is. No, going the wrong way. Sorry, guys. No, I don't know what happened to it. Oh, there it is. That one. Yep. That's it. It's not a very good photo. I got that on my phone, so you can see it's pretty tough on detail, but the little underpass that they're looking for is right there. We found that underpass. We drove through it and turned right, and there was a grove of trees. And the lady that told us about this, she said, when the children go through confirmation at the church, there's one of their ceremonies is each one of those children, as they're confirmed to the church, they plant a tree in this grove, and there's a stone marker on that spot. We found it. We drove there. This is the place we stopped. I got out with my heart pounding. I walked on that land. My mind was in turmoil. I thought about all the trauma and the hardship that my family experienced on this spot of earth. This is where my journey began. I could almost feel the energy through the soles of my feet. It was very emotional. Colleen kept asking how I felt. I couldn't explain. After the war, when we were relocated to a refugee camp, the barracks where we lived and where I was born were burned down. In the 1980s, the village started planting trees on that location and placed a large stone marker. It's now a very peaceful place. The rest of our trip on the Danube River was beautiful, amazing cities, breathtaking scenery, Nuremberg, Regensburg, Passau, Vienna, and Budapest. We enjoyed this very much, but to me, it was almost anticlimactic. I'm fortunate and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we're going to open it up for questions for John. We do have a full house, so raise your hand really high for me, and I will bring the mic to you, and we'll do our best to get through questions.
Okay.
So thank you for your lecture. It was very informative. I'm wondering if you know what happened to your wet nurse and if you were in contact with any of her descendants?
No, unfortunately, no. Just lost total contact with, through all the turmoil after the war with the different refugee camps, and everybody just scattered. So, no, unfortunately, I don't. I wish I did.
John, did any of your family speak English when they got to America, or was that something everybody had to learn?
No, of course, there wasn't any, during that time, there wasn't any schooling. After the war, in the refugee camp, my older brothers and sisters did attend school in Hamburg, Germany, in the refugee camp. I forgot one piece of the story. I got to share this. We didn't speak English, but I did. I knew some English. And the reason I knew English was we had a friendly American soldier that befriended us and came to visit us in our little room in the refugee camp. And he taught me to sing, "You Are My Sunshine." I memorized the words to "You Are My Sunshine" and memorized them phonetically, not knowing what they even meant, but I memorized them phonetically. So when we came to the United States, and I was, came into Great Falls, and the kids wanted to say something. All I knew was, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." That was it. That was my story. But that's the only words in English that I knew. But, yeah.
So, John, are there any other foods that your family doesn't like besides turnips and broccoli?
No, we're pretty open to all kinds of foods.
And then I saw the Christmas tree in the picture Was that part of your Polish tradition, a Christmas tree?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when you were in Hamburg, they did have a school for you or for the kids?
I didn't, I was too young, so I didn't attend school. My older brothers and sisters did have some school in Germany.
And was that taught by American soldiers?
It would have been taught by American teachers, probably. I'm not sure if they were military or not.
Okay. And then you said they fed you very well. What,
Well, they fed us
Remember the-
adequately with spam.
the spam? Okay. So have you been to the Spam Museum in Minnesota?
I haven't.
Well, you need to go. Joe.
Oh, okay, I'll put that on my list.
You need to go. About 30 miles east of.
Okay.
There's over 35 acres.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the story. It was wonderful. What about your parents? Did they ever get to go back to Poland? Did your mom keep contact with her family? Were they able to reunite?
Yes, thank you. I did take my mother to Poland in 1974. And that was still communist at that time. But she still had two sisters that were still alive in Poland. And so when we visited in 1974, we were able to stay, and both of her sisters lived on little farms way on the Ukrainian border in eastern Poland. And so we did stay a few days with each of her sisters and their family. And but at that time in 1974, under the communists, Poland was very, very bleak. There wasn't the economy was really, really bad. They didn't, when my mother asked her sisters by mail what they would like us to bring to Poland, and they asked for soap, they asked for toothpaste, and just bare essentials because they couldn't buy those things in the store. And it was very, during that time, it was very depressing. I was there about 30 days at that time. And it was very, very depressing. It was very, again, stores were almost non-existent. I mean, the inventory in the stores was very minimal. And yeah, it was, and where her two sisters lived on those little farms, they were still without running water. They did have electricity, but the communists limited them to one light bulb per room of a certain wattage, and I don't remember what that was, but it was very, very controlled at that time. And then it was quite a bit different when I went back to Poland with Colleen, just 5 years ago. Poland is now in the modern economy and doing very well since they got rid of the communists, and that happened, I think, in 1986. So during that whole period from 1939 to 1986, Poland was under either the control of the Nazis or the communists. And finally they're free and they're very happy. They're living well.
You state that in 1945, the liberation took place, correct?
Yes.
And then you stated that it wasn't until October of 45 where they got it advanced enough to get certain groups further in.
Yes.
What was that transition like of when the liberation took place, but people didn't know about it, or what kept going on? Well, they'd already been liberated, but they couldn't be cared for, I guess.
Well, in our case, I can't answer for the rest of the other camps, but in our case in 1945, see, Auschwitz was liberated, probably one of the first ones, because the Russians actually liberated Auschwitz, not the Americans. The Russians came, and the Russians are who liberated and opened up Auschwitz. And in our case, it wasn't until, I think, September or October of 1945 that the Americans, and they, of course, again, we were set free. The Nazis were gone, but we had no money, we had no resources, no place to go, and no way to get there. You know, and so we stayed, and the Russian or the U.S. Army did bring food and clothing, and so we stayed there until they were finally able to organize a refugee camp and in Hamburg for us. Okay, but it took a while. You know, they had to build the infrastructure.
Thank you.
Sir, would you say that your experience with the American Army as liberators, did that influence your decision to join the Marine Corps and maybe return some service or find some way to do that yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That was, you know, when I graduated from high school, that was my first thought was, you know, I need to do this. And, you know, I have no regrets of my decision whatsoever. None.
In serving with the Marine Corps, John, did you become a U.S. citizen before or after service?
Good question. I became a citizen while I was in the Marine Corps. And that opens up another little story. My brother Tom was in this country 6 months when he got drafted and sent to Korea. He could barely speak English, and he was not a citizen, and he got drafted.
Wow.
When I enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, they wouldn't accept my enlistment because I was not a citizen. I had to go through the hoops. I had to sign a proclamation, a declaration of intent that I was going to become a citizen. And if my parents had become citizens before I turned 18, I would have been automatically a citizen, but they didn't. Anyway, I had to sign a declaration of intent to become a citizen. And I had to fill out all these questionnaires and send them into the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And it took 6 weeks before my enlistment was accepted. But I got there.
John, thank you for your wonderful talk. And I'm wondering how many years in total was your family in the camp, in the concentration?
From 1942 to 1945, so 3 years.
3 years.
Yep.
Okay, thank
My husband's grandparents immigrated from Poland, and there was a lot of people that settled on the west side, kind of in that St.
Yep.
Joseph's Church area.
Yep.
And their name was Wazenek, and they had 6 children, and the grandma took in ironing, and the kids went to
Yep.
Franklin School, my
Yep.
in-laws. And she took in ironing and cleaned the Franklin School to help out with, and then a lot of the immigrants from Poland worked for the railroad.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, there was a whole group of those refugees that came with us same time that all went to work for Great Northern Railroad. And, you know, so the Ryle family, let's see, Ryle, Yędrzejewski, they all went to work for the Great Northern Railroad on the west side. Oh, yeah, and there was a whole little conclave of Poles over on the west side.
and my brother-in-law, he's passed away, but his name was Badevsky.
Yep.
And then a lot of people, they lived on the west side.
You bet.
Same thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
You bet.
Well, I'm so glad you made it to Great Falls, Montana.
Me too.
John and I graduated from Central Catholic High School in 1962.
Yep.
John, what was the name of the book by Samuel Pisar
Samuel Pisar, Of Blood and Hope.
of Blood and Hope?
Of Blood and Hope. Amazing book.
Thank you.
Amazing book.
So would you mind sharing with me, what would you say was your biggest struggle in immigrating to the United States? And how did the community in Montana make that possible?
Well,
I know you mentioned a bit about the church, but
Yes.
how did they make you feel like this was home? When did that start feeling like it was home for you?
you know, when we moved to Great Falls from Fairfield, my dad went right to work at Central Catholic High School as a custodian. And we moved it into lower north side down by the Heisey. And we were accepted. I mean, we didn't have any, I don't remember any conflicts of any kind. We were just accepted. And again, the kids wanted me to say something and all I knew was, "You are my sunshine." That was my whole repertoire right there, you know? And, but yeah, I mean, it was, I remember, I spent a lot of time at the Heisey and at Gibson Park. You know, that was 2 blocks down the street, and Heisey was 1 block up the other way. And I was very involved with all the kids, and, that was not an issue. Yep.
I don't even need a mic. Thanks. Hey, John, I want to say one thing. You were worried about stumble. You didn't stumble.
No.
You used your words wisely, and this was wonderful what you brought to us tonight.
Thanks, Frank.
I will say one more thing. If any of the meat companies in the United States at this time knew about your Polish sausage, they would be worried.
Thanks, Frank.
Yes.
My husband's grandmother, you talked about "You Are My Sunshine." My husband's, my mother-in-law, his grandmother taught him that song, "You Are My Sunshine." And then that became our song. You remember that song?
Yep. And
for our whole marriage.
Yep.
We got married in 1966.
I have that, "You Are My Sunshine," the whole,
My only son.
I've got the poster right on my wall, and it's been there ever since.
Well, that's what he'd call me, and then we'd go to a dance, and he would request, "You Are My Sunshine." for my
Absolutely.
wife. And bought me T-shirts. "You Are My Sunshine."
You bet. Thank you.
Well, John, I just want to say on behalf of Great Falls College, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate this. This has meant a lot. I know it takes a lot of courage to tell your story, and we really appreciate it. So on behalf of Great Falls College and everybody who's here, I want to say thank you, and we do have a gift for you. And let's give John a round of applause.